Recording. Yep.
To the cloud?
Perfect. Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. Okay, I'm going to hit broadcast. Are you ready?
We need the slideshow up first.
Okay. All right, hold on. See, I'm getting my feet wet here. Let me share my screen and then.
Perfect.
All right, we ready?
We are.
Here we go.
Ready.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sharon Bonney. I'm the Executive Director for the Coalition on Adult Basic Education, COABE, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar. We're going to go to the next slide. Okay, so today's webinar, go back one second, there you go. Adult Numeracy Network is presenting Put on Your Own Math before assisting students. And next slide, please. You'll receive certificates for CEU verification. They will be sent to you via Zoom, which is our platform that we use. They'll arrive within 24 hours after the close of this session. So you'll want to wait until 3 o'clock tomorrow. They'll be right there in your inbox from Zoom. I do want to encourage everybody, if for some reason you did not receive it or you think you didn't, please check your junk or your spam folders because often they end up there. But you will receive your certificate through Zoom within 24 hours. This is just one of 50 webinars that we present annually. Our goal really is to take the best of the best from our national conference and bring it outside that brick and mortar so that those who can't attend the conference have just a smidge of an understanding of what takes place at the national level at our national conference. And these are brought to you free of charge, thanks to many sponsorships that we have through our wonderful vendors. Next slide, please. Okay, so hopefully many of you were able to join us for our Managers Mondays, November through December. We covered a host of topics, including WIOA Basics, NRS, Adult Basic Education Structure and Activities, IET and Career Pathways, leveraging WIOA Title II funds, and other resources. If you were unable to join us, don't worry, those are all available on our website, again, free of charge to you as members, and that's with special thanks to Essential Education. Next slide, please. Many of our webinars, almost all of our webinars, are on our Adult Educators repository. There you can upload your best practices and resources and also download resources from other presenters. We also have a community practice there so that you can ask questions and network with other adult educators just like yourself. Next slide, please. So our COABE Board of Directors, this is super exciting because we have a number of positions that are up and available. That's regions 2, 4, and 6 representatives, as well as our president-elect and our vice president for membership. And the voting will begin actually later today. You'll receive a ballot. We encourage everybody to vote. And that gives you the opportunity to ensure that we get the right leaders in office here at the COABE office. Okay, next slide, please. We had a lot of participants in this year's national awards. We have the Teacher of the Year, Administrator of the Year, Adult Learner of the Year, all receiving $10,000 each. And that will be at our national conference where they'll also receive recognition. We also have State Innovator, Workplace of the Year, and Advocate of the Year who will receive $2,000 each. And we just want to congratulate all of our winners. They've been posted to the app. They're also on social media and on our website. But we will be publicly acknowledging them at our awards event on the first day of our conference. Next slide, please. So Educate and Elevate, our national public awareness campaign. Our field has successfully staved off $87 million in funding cuts and added $60 million to the pot. And that's by all of us working together when those legislative alerts come out. Really want to encourage you that we just sent one out the other day. There's 100+ new legislators in the House of Representatives who may know nothing about adult education. So you know what they say, if you're not at the table, you're possibly on the menu. I want to encourage everybody, when you see those legislative alerts, take action. It takes you 5 minutes, and you can add your voice to those who have already been responding. We've had 92,000+ contacts to date. We'd love to have more than 100,000. We just need your help to do so. Next slide, please. You can also download free resources about Adult Ed and Family Literacy Week that took place September 23rd through the 29th. We're already planning for our next Family Literacy Week, which will be the 3rd week in September of 2019. So save the date, 3rd week in September of 2019. Okay, next slide, please. adult ed or adult learner membership. This is free. We want to onboard as many members as possible. So for all you teachers that are working with students, with adult learners, you can onboard them for free for this year. They will receive insurance, $60,000 value for life insurance each year, free of charge, along with the opportunity to be nominated for that $10,000 award. Next slide, please. Mention the COABE insurance. Okay, we will have an adult learner strand at our conference, and we have an adult learner ambassador training at our conference. But in addition to that, we also gave out grants to attend the conference. So March 31st through April 3rd in New Orleans, Louisiana. And we hope that you'll join us for that. Next slide, please. COABE partners with more than 35 organizations to provide professional development, one of which is Adult Numeracy Network, who our wonderful presenters are from the Adult Numeracy Network. But we have 35 plus strands taking place at the conference. And so we love to say if it's taking place in the field of adult education, we have a strand for it at our conference. Next slide, please. We also have a national journal, which I'm really proud of. This last journal was the Career Pathways edition. The next journal will be a Prison Literacy edition. We had 4 times as many submissions for this journal than we have in the past. We also had really high response rate to our Prison Literacy Committee with over 170 applicants for position on that committee. So we're very excited about what will be hitting the stands at our national conference. Next slide, please. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop here. I believe the presenters want to introduce themselves, but before we go any further, I would like for you all to please put your name and where you're joining us from in the chat box, and please put any questions that you might have right there in the Q&A. So questions and Q&A, and introduce yourself in the chat box. And Liz, we're going to now turn this over to the presenters. Thank you. So Stephanie and Heidi, you're up.
All right. So glad that everyone was here today. Let me switch over to my screen and share what we have. You should have gotten an email with your Zoom invitation with a couple of links, and we see several of you are already in there, and we appreciate that. For those who haven't had a chance to get into the Google links, you'll find them in the chat box. You may have to scroll to the very top of the chat so that you can access those, but you can also check into your email. We do appreciate you being here for the Adult Numeracy Network presentation. Put on your own math before assisting students. My name is Heidi Schuler-Jones, and I am the secretary for the Adult Numeracy Network. Stephanie, you want to introduce yourself? I think we're muted.
I think I'm trying to unmute Stephanie, and she has to unmute herself. It's not letting me.
Okay.
There
We're
she
waiting
is.
on that. Okay.
Hi, I am Stephanie Stewart. I am a regional representative for the Adult Numeracy Network.
And for those of you who are new to the Adult Numeracy Network, we're a group, a community dedicated to quality math instruction at the adult level. We are all over the country. We support each other from where we are. We collaborate together. We work together to create policy and put leadership in action with presentations and activities and resources. You'll see many of us active with links and with COABE. The names that you see, the five names that you see on the screen, this is just a small portion of the Adult Numeracy Network board. But each of these folks worked together last year to facilitate a whole day of professional development at the 2018 pre-conference at COABE. And Stephanie and I were fortunate enough to get to share a small sample of that training with you today. The Adult Numeracy Network, we developed a day-long training last year that focused on our 2 ANN principles for professional development, design and content. And this webinar will highlight one key component of the design of professional development, and that is that sound professional development in adult education mathematics should be designed to begin with teachers as mathematics learners and thinkers. And that's what we're here to do today. And this is why we focused at last year's COABE pre-conference a whole day to develop our own math skills. And we'll do so this year at the COABE pre-conference as well on Sunday, March 31st. And of course, we only have a single hour with today's webinar, but in that time, we do hope that we're able to meet some of the objectives regarding the design principle for this webinar. There are 5 objectives on the screen, but I want to draw your attention to the last 3 in particular. We really want to emphasize in our time together the exploration. We want to increase awareness of your own strengths with certain math topics, as well as the gaps that might be there in your own content knowledge. And in doing that, we want to give you specific strategies and some resources to help you continue to develop your own learning here, but also after the webinar. So we're going to give you some resources that you can play around with after. And then we also want to teach you about the value of using low floor and high ceiling activities, like this one. During the afternoon of the 2018 ANN pre-conference, Brooke Istas, Stephanie Stewart, and I led this partnered activity by Dr. Joe Bowler called Cover the Field, and we adapted it somewhat for our audience. And this activity builds on prior knowledge around arrays and area models. It applies understanding of composing and decomposing numbers to focus on binomials with numbers. And what's great about this activity is that it allows us to decompose rectangles by literally covering the field, like a piece of grid paper, for example, with smaller rectangles that we create from rolled dice. This activity also allows us to think flexibly about what rectangles we might need to make and how best to arrange them on the field. So this activity has a good bit of strategy that's involved with it. And then finally, the activity takes basic ideas and it extends them into more abstract concepts, which we're also going to get to explore today. So this activity addresses the area model in a very tangible way, a very flexible way, and it encourages strategy and rich discussion. And it also includes a subtraction challenge that's within it for those who might be ready to work up to that level. So if you were to do this with your students or maybe a group of colleagues, you would need these tools. You would need 4 6-sided dice, and if you don't have 4 6-sided dice, you can use an online version, a random number generator, and the link that you see on your screen will provide in the chat box. You need a piece of grid paper, one per person, or you can work with a partner. The entire grid paper is your field, so keep that in mind when we do these activities. A full sheet of grid paper is your field. You also need a blank piece of paper so that you can record your dimensions from the rolled dice, and then you need something obviously to write with. So let's take a look at an example about from this before we try one on our own. Here's how it works. You would roll the 4 dice, pick 2 of the numbers to add together to make a binomial, then add the other 2 numbers that are shown on the dice to make a second binomial. Once you have those 2 binomials, you want to multiply them together to create your length and width for your rectangle. So I'd like you to take a look at the dice that are rolled in the picture and then some of the binomial pairs that were made from those numbers. And by the way, the red and green dice have no additional meaning. It's just different colors of dice. So you might see, if you're looking at my screen, this first pair of binomials was made by adding the 5 and the 3, and then adding the 1 and the 2 and multiplying in between. So we end up with a rectangle that is 8 by 3 for an area of 24. This last example, the person added together 3 plus 2, and then 1 plus 5, making a 5 by 6 rectangle for an area of 30. Each of these pairs makes a length and a width, and we'll use each of these dimensions to make a rectangle to cover the field. So this next slide lets you see how this might work given those numbers. You see on here 3 different rectangles, but in reality, with the game, you would only pick one of those rectangles to place on the field. You don't get to use all 3 in that turn. So you really have to think about which one gives you the best advantage to cover it. Sometimes you want a really big rectangle, and sometimes you need a really small rectangle. You have to keep that in mind as you're manipulating the numbers that are on the dice to create your dimensions. So we're going to do this in just a minute. Are there any questions at this point? Anything in the chat box that we need to take a look at? Okay, doesn't look like it. All right, so let's see how this would look. We're going to look at a field that is already in progress. So this is as if a game is being played. This is how it might look. All right. Yep. So you see the 4 dice that we have rolled. I'd like you to take a look at this partially covered field and see what's available to you. Take a piece of scrap paper that you might have, and I just want you to jot down binomial pairs that you could make from the rolled dice, the 1, 2, 3, and 6. Take a minute. Jot down all the possible combinations you might make. Keep in mind that there are rectangles you're going to make from these combinations, and think about what might be most useful to cover the open spaces that are on the field. You can't overlap with another rectangle, so it's only the open spaces. I want you to explore what would happen with the same numbers arranged in different ways. Maybe you're doing all adding. Maybe you're doing all subtracting, or maybe you're mixing that and doing some adding and subtracting. So I'm just going to pause for about a minute and let you jot down some of the binomial pairs that you could make.
Heidi, we do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, does it mean that you are trying to choose the number that covers the largest size rectangle?
Okay, that's a great question. And remember, this is a game about strategy. So it may be that your strategy is to create the largest rectangle to cover the most area. It could be, though, that you also see that there's some smaller spaces that you're going to eventually have to cover. And so you're kind of looking at currently what have you rolled and thinking down the road of what you might need to roll to make some of these spaces. So it's pure strategy. It doesn't have to be the largest necessarily. Good question. I see somebody has put in the chat box, what is the goal of the game? The goal of the game is to literally cover the field with rectangles. So you want to be able to cover every single square on this grid field by the end of that game. And again, this is as if a game is in progress, so we may have already had several rolls to get to this point. And in this one roll with the 1, 2, 3, and 6, what possible numbers could you make? And again, you just place one rectangle in this turn. Okay, I think you probably had enough time to come up with a couple of ideas on how to make some binomial pairs. We're going to switch the screen now to go to our Google Slides. So for those who were able to go ahead and get set up, I see lots of you up here. There's nearly 43 people in this. This is great.
Heidi, hold on 1 minute. Just okay. I wanted to cut in for a second and just, sure. There's a few questions that are popping up.
Okay.
Is overlapping allowed?
Overlapping is not allowed.
Okay, and then it says, would it not be better to have the triangles touch?
They certainly should touch, cannot overlap. Yes. If they're not touching, then they're not covering everything.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure, thanks for letting me know about that. Okay, so I would like everybody to kind of take a look at my screen, and what I'm showing you is a Google slide, and this is one of the links that we sent out to you. For those of you who are not comfortable with Google Slides, I just want you to know that the steps I'm about to walk us through, you can actually access down here at the bottom. So if everybody look at their screen for a minute, you see down at the very bottom, my cursor turns into a hand when I wave it over these 3 dots. If you hover on that and left click your mouse, pull this screen up, you can see all of the directions that I'm about to walk us through. So if you are new to Google Slides or you're not comfortable with Google, you can go back and reread those later. So now I just want to show you what we're doing. Okay, so please just watch at this moment. Do not do anything until I've gone through all the steps so that we can keep up with this. So to get started, you're going to take this template and you're going to right click with your mouse. And when you do that, you're going to go to duplicate slide. When you duplicate the slide, you now have your own field. And we want you to name that field. So everybody, some people are in here moving things around. Don't move, don't move, don't do anything just yet. Everybody look at slide 4, which is on the screen, okay? And I'm going to pull this one up. And you see right here where it says type your name? Because I duplicated this slide is now me. And so I'm going to type my name, and this becomes my field that we get to work on. So everybody stay put where you are right now. Let me keep walking through what we're doing. Just looking at my screen right now to see the field. Once you have created your field and named it, that's your space, I want you to go up here to the Insert tab. When you go to Insert, go to Shape, then Shapes, and then Rectangle. And this is where you're going to get to draw your your rectangle that you just made. And so I'm going to show you how I created a rectangle with those dice. I connected the 6 and the 3, and I added those to make a 9. And then I subtracted 1 from the 2 to make 1. And so I've made a 9 by 1 rectangle. So for those who are new to using shapes, when you push down your left mouse button and drag that rectangle down, you create, until you release it, any size rectangle that you want. Now, I want a 9 by 1, so I'm going to drag that down. I'm going to check my numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then there's 1 across this way. So this is my 9 by 1 rectangle. Once you've made that, I'd like you to go back down here to where you typed your name. Everybody still watch, please. So beside your name, I'd like you to type in what you did. And so I'm going to take off this note right here, and I'm going to say I made 6 plus 3 and 2 minus 1. And that gave me a 9 by 1 rectangle. Okay? This is your field, but this is also a place for you to take notes. And so once you've made your rectangle and included the dimensions, I want you to go back and type some notes about how you got started. What made you put the numbers together the way you did? How did you know where you wanted to put the rectangle? Maybe once you got it there, you said, no, I don't like it and I want to move that around. Put those comments in there as well. And then what I'd like you to do is go in there and start exploring other people's work. So if you take a look up here, I'm going to pull this one down, and I'm going to go into my rectangle and highlight it. And let's say this was somebody else's rectangle. I want to put a comment. I like the way they did it, or I'm curious how they did it. And I can right-click on that and go down here to comment. And so I've highlighted the rectangle that was made. I right-clicked in it, and it opened up a comment box. And here I can put a note. I can put a comment about this person's rectangle. Be sure if you do that to hit comment, and then it gets posted. And this is a way for you to collect some feedback from peers or some questions from your peers. All right, any questions before we get moving? All right, go ahead and have fun. Start up here. Remember, don't work on the first one. You want to duplicate slide number 1 first. I see some of you are using an iPhone, and you may have some difficulty accessing this. If you're able to at least see the link or to see the Google Slides, one thing you can do is just kind of click through other people's work. So I'm going to click on some other people's work. I see people have duplicated slide. They're not quite working on them yet. But you can get in there if you aren't able to access. So here's Bonnie's. And I can see that she's got a rectangle that she put down here at the bottom. I don't see down here yet any of her notes, but if I'm curious, I could go on here to her slide. This is slide 23, and right click, and I can ask her a question. I can say, what are your dimensions, or what numbers did you combine? And she can give me some feedback on that. So if you're not able to manipulate this yourself, please feel free to kind of dig around and watch other people's stuff. You also, at any point in time, can go back to the presentation and leave something in the comments and tell us your binomial pairs there. Okay, and some of you are using paper. That's great. Use a piece of paper. You can go ahead and type into the chat box what your dimensions are. I see Donna's been in here. She made a 9 by 3. Excellent. Cindy made a, oh, she's still typing right now. She made a 7 by 5. She covered quite a bit of area when she did that. Cynthia typed in the chat box that she made an 8 by 4. Okay. And Stephanie is reminding us that you don't have to only do adding. You may also subtract numbers. So you can do all addition. You can do all subtraction. You can also do a combination of those. Tony did a 7 by 7 in the chat box, I see. These are great. So for those of you who already finished this assignment, I'm going to give you another task while some of the people are still getting theirs created. Look at the ones that are already on your field that were pre-assigned to your field. Think about what numbers you might have that might have been rolled to make those rectangles, to get them on the field. So for example, there's a 5x4 on the screen. What kind of numbers do you think could be rolled to have made that 5x4? Just kind of be thinking on that. We're going to take about 15 more seconds and then move on. Excellent. You guys did really, really well. It's neat to go back and just to remember this Google slide and the other one that we'll be using, these are going to be left open for you. So you can come back and look at these at any point in time. You can explore it some more. Really encourage you to start looking through what other people did. Christine added right here a nice big bright pink one. So go through and see these later. We're not taking them down. We want to leave it for you to explore. Also, feel free to make a copy of these two documents that we created so you can use it in your own classroom, or if you've got to go back and teach some other people, you can do that. All right, I'm going to switch back to our PowerPoint at this point and kind of talk about a couple of things. So what were some of the math topics that you explored in this activity? You can just type them into the chat box for me. What are some of the math topics that we explored from this? I think everybody is still playing right now. Area of a rectangle. Thank you. We looked at multiplication. Perimeter area. Multiplication facts.
There's a question in the question box that says, can I use the 6 4 times and make a 12 by 12 multiplied by 12?
Nice try, but you have to only use the numbers on the dice. So if the 6 was used once, then you have already used it up. You have to use the other 3 numbers. But I like your thinking. That's definitely a great way to make a very, very large rectangle. Good. Factors and multiples, dimensions, multiplication properties are in use. Yeah, there is a ton of math that we're doing in this. Decomposing, composing numbers, sum and difference, decision making. I like that. So what I want to know now is, how did you think about these math topics before we did this activity? How did you think about doing some of these things, like composing and decomposing and polynomials and vocabulary? How did you think about them before the activity? And I think because we're running a little bit short on time, I'm going to move this on. It says they were more abstract math ideas before the activity. Excellent. They were separate ideas completely, different topics. Similar to a game I used before with dice and a clock face. So you've done something like this. You were surprised at all the ways that the numbers could be manipulated. How about after this activity? How are you thinking about these topics now? Thinking about strategies, the reasoning behind it, instead of just spitting out math facts. I like that, Rebecca. The concepts behind it, absolutely. And hopefully you saw how conceptual understanding regarding these topics can be deepened from an activity like this. So maybe the concepts are there, but this is a really cool way to get them to deepen that understanding a bit more. One quick thing, before you ever do an activity like this is something you would want to try out yourself, maybe with your colleagues or your friends. Try it out before you do this with your students so you can get a sense of the kinds of questions and conversations that you might have in front of you before you do them, things that might develop along the way. And for those who really want to get the full lesson plan version of this, we were going to provide, and we have provided in our resource link, the book that this came from, Mindset Mathematics, Visualizing and Investigating Big Ideas for Grade 4. This is Joe Bowler's work, and it's a wonderful resource for you to get other activities and ideas. There's an entire lesson plan and discussion questions that you could go to from this. All right, so I'm going to shift gears for a moment to take a look at a higher level math topic. However, I promise that this will come back and connect to the cover the field activity. So on your screen, you see a problem that might be found among the tougher questions on a high school equivalency test. In this problem, students are asked to find the pair of binomial factors that will give the quadratic expression that's shown when multiplied together. This type of question involves the skill of factoring, which is an important skill on its own and is also at the foundation of questions that ask about solving quadratic equations, like this one, or finding the zeros of quadratic functions, like this graph that you see on your screen. But for now, let's just stick with the concept of factoring expressions. The answer choices here that are on the screen look kind of like the expressions that we came up with for the cover the field activity, except that these have X's in them. How would the cover the field activity be different if some of the values were unknown? Would we still be able to represent the area with a rectangle? So let's look back at the dice that we previously rolled and consider what expressions we might generate if we had some variables involved. What are some ways to combine these values that you see on the screen now into dimensions like we did when all four numbers were shown? Go ahead and type those into your chat box. What are some ways to combine these values that you see in the picture into dimensions just like we did with all four numbers? Yeah, Donna said x minus 3 and x minus 2. X minus 2, x plus 4. We don't have a 4 on there, so we would have to use either the 2 or the 3. Because again, we've got two variables on there, two x's. X plus 2 times x plus 3. Excellent. So this is how the dimensions might show up on a high school equivalency problem. Note that all of the pairs of factors in the answer choices could be made with the dice we rolled, but only one of them will produce the desired expression. Just as we were able to use rectangles to show products when all the elements were numbers, we can model expressions involving variables with rectangles as well. And this visualization will show us which pair of binomials is the one we're looking for. And we're going to use algebra tiles to do that. For those who aren't familiar with algebra tiles, this is a fantastic tool that is a great visual model for the students to use. But first, let's get familiar with what we can demonstrate with each tile. So you see in this blue one that's here on the screen, this is our x squared term, and it is a square, which is very helpful. We have the x term, which is actually oriented two different ways. There's a vertical and a horizontal, and the nice thing is you can manipulate these one way or the other to match the dimension. So this x term matches the x squared along that side. This x term, when it's horizontal, matches our constant, our 1. The dimensions have to match up along the edges. Now, this is all a set of positive values. So algebra tiles also have negative values, and they look just the same, except they are typically a different color, usually a red that's shown up. These are virtual manipulatives, but you can also use hands-on ones that you can order. So let's look back at the expression we talked about before. This one is the x squared plus 5x plus 6. And the binomial pairs from option A from the multiple choice. Notice how these binomial pairs represent the dimensions, just like they did with cover the field. So you notice along the top, this is our x plus 3, and down the side, our dimension is an x plus a 2. And the question I have for you is, does it matter if the x plus 3 is down the side and the x plus 2 is along the top? Does that make a difference? No, why doesn't it make a difference? Yeah, the length and the width is the same as our width and our length. It's the commutative property of multiplication, exactly. So it really doesn't matter, but we've got it oriented this way. So let's see how this would look when we start multiplying the dimensions. So we have an x and another x, and when they multiply together, they make an x squared. And you can see it is a square. And then we also have our two values down here that also get multiplied by x, and so they become 2 of those x's. In this space over here on the right, top right corner, we have our x multiplied 3 times, and so we end up with 3 x's. And down in the bottom right-hand corner, these are just the numbers that are being multiplied, a 3 by a 2, and we have 6 little ones down in the corner of this. What do you notice about the area that's covered? Give me some feedback. What are you seeing on here? It's a rectangle, exactly. What else do you notice? It's proportional, excellent. It's the answer, I like that. We're gonna get to the answer. Same size as the original components, oh, I like that. There are lots of squares and rectangles that made this. Some of you may notice that the constants are down in the bottom right-hand corner and they are diagonal from the squared term. Okay. Does the total area, someone already gave this away, but that's all right. Does the total area made by option A match the expression? Do we have x squared plus 5x plus 6? Yeah, we do, because this x squared, these 3 x's and 2 x's, they are the exact same. They're common to each other, and so they total 5 of those x's and our constant of 6. So this does match. So now let's take a look at option B. Using the chat box, tell me what the dimensions might be on this image. What do you see as the dimensions of this picture? X minus 2 and x minus 3, exactly. So remember, it's the entire length, which does include that x. So we need to be sure that that's a part of this conversation. So those dimensions, okay. What do you think the value of the tiles would be? What do you think the value of the tiles would be as we start to fill this space in? Think about how they might look. What would go right here in this top left-hand corner? X squared, excellent. How about down here below it? What do you think might go in this bottom left corner? Negative 2x, excellent. Yeah, so here's how it might look. We've got our x squared term, followed by our negative 2x, because again, we're multiplying negative 2, and our x term is done twice. In the top right-hand corner, we see that there are x's, and they are all negative, and there's 3 of them. And then what is this going to be down here in the bottom right-hand corner? Positive 6. Yeah, because we have a negative 3 times a negative 2 that gives us our positive 6. So this does match option B out of this. And the question I have for you is, think about how your students might think about it. We know option A worked out. Option B, does it match the expression? Does the total area match? It is the same shape as the last one. It might be a little misleading. No, it doesn't match. It matches the first term, the x squared. It matches the last term, but it doesn't match the middle term because we're looking for a positive 5x, and instead we have negative 5x. And the confusion might be is that it does look just the same, as in that it's the same shape. So one thing you might do with the students is encourage them to look at options C and D and think ahead before they put the manipulatives together and think about what's wrong with C and D that might be a problem for them, or are they a problem? Let them test it out. Let them explore it. Think about the reasoning behind it. Encourage them to talk about what are they seeing. What pattern might they use to help know in advance that they don't have to model it? Yeah, the colors might be wrong, they don't match. And let that be some of the guiding conversation about why C and D might not work. And then let them try it out, their thinking and their reasoning. This kind of reasoning is extremely important because it helps us to start recognizing the relationships between this very concrete visual model and then the abstract expression that you see on the screen as well, which can help us to consider potential factors when given only the area or when we only have a trinomial expression. Is everybody feeling okay at this point? Any questions? We do have the resource that we use to make these slides that we're going to share with you at the end. So those who want to go back and play with this a bit more, you can do that on your own. Keep in mind that factoring is not an easy task. The problems with all positives and a leading coefficient of 1 can feel tricky when they're first introduced, yet those are actually the easiest ones to introduce. When you include negative values or a leading coefficient that's greater than 1, that's when things can get really frustrating for students, particularly if you're not using manipulatives or visual models. And that is why it is so important to model these ideas and these concepts so students can actually see and feel what's happening with the factoring. Okay. Some of you may be experienced with this with FOIL. It may have popped up in the chat that went flying by. FOIL is the tool that many of us learned how to do the factoring with, and it has its time and place, but it has limitations. And with area, like we're using right here, the advantage is you don't only have to use binomials. You could stretch the dimensions of this to include multiple sets of values. So FOIL is limited, area model is not. So that's always my push. Encourage people to use some visual models before they really lean on FOIL. But by the way, FOIL is in here. This is our first term. This is our outer term. This is the inner, and this is our last. So this models what FOIL is doing, but it doesn't have to only do 2 binomial pairs. Okay, so here's the beginning of another high school equivalency problem that asks students to factor a quadratic expression. And we'll get to the answer choices in just a minute. What I want to know is, does the trinomial we're looking at represent the area or the dimensions of a possible rectangle? Does this trinomial represent the area or the dimensions? And how do we know? I'm seeing area. How do we know it's that area? What do you know? What do you see? It's a product. It's important. There's some term that is squared. Exactly. It's a quadratic equation. There's a square term. It's the product of length and width. This is great. What can you tell me about how this area might look if we were to use algebra tiles? You already see some connections between certain parts of the trinomial and what tile you might use. What can you start telling me about what we would see in the tiles if we were to use this? You'd see there's 10 red ones that are needed. Absolutely. You need red tiles somewhere. Yep. What else might you see? What other tiles might you know are in there? A big blue square. I like that. You guys are giving some really good ideas. So let's go to the tiles and take a look at some of your findings. So here is a model of some of the trinomial already set up as the area with the squared term that you guys mentioned and the 10 little red squares that are in the bottom. Those are our constants. So note that the small squares representing -10 in the lower right corner are arranged as a rectangle. This is not the only way to arrange 10 squares into a rectangle, because you could do a 10 by 1 rectangle. But let's play with this and see if we can fill it in a way that would give us the total area that we're looking for, because right now it's incomplete. So what are you seeing in the model that helps you to know how we might fill in the rest to create the area that we're looking for? What do you see only in what is shown on the screen? We need 3 big red rectangles. We see a 5 by 2. Where do you see the 5 by 2? The 5 by 2, we're picking up, that's coming out of where? The red squares, exactly. How do we know which one of the 5 or the 2, how do we know which one gets the negative? Or do they both get the negative? How do we know that? And what could we do with our students to let them discover this on their own? That's the important thing here. We might know that there's a 5 and a 2, but our students are going to wonder which one gets a negative and do they even need it? How do we let them explore that? So one thing we could do is we could let the students explore with the tiles what happens with a +5 and a -2. We could let them explore what happens with a -5 and a +2. We could let them explore what happens with both of them negative. And the idea is to let them explore it and then describe what's happening. The more they explore, the more they describe what's happening. Every time they set it up, the more they make that connection back to the abstract expression along the way. And it's really important for them to make those discoveries on their own. So here we are. Here are the factors that complete the large rectangle area. Does the total area shown represent that expression that's at the top? Yeah. And you might see, for those who aren't familiar with working with zero pairs, you see this green, these two green X values. We have 5 red X values in those terms. So these two will cancel out the two that are red here, and they become zero pairs. They don't cancel and go away. They just represent 0. And so what we're left with are 3 negative X's. And so we end up with an X squared minus the 3X minus the 10, which is the expression that we see on the screen. All right. So let's see how we can write the expressions for the dimensions of this rectangle. What are the dimensions that you see on there? What are the dimensions that I just put on the screen? Let me go backwards so you can see it. So this was our area, and now I'm revealing what the dimensions would be. Could you tell me what those are? Excellent. X minus 5, X plus 2. Exactly. And here are those answers in the multiple choice. Do you see which one of these would be the correct answer to this high school equivalency problem? Which would be the correct answer? Yep. Exactly. B. B is the correct solution to this. And again, this is a high school equivalency problem. This is one that came out of a sample question. Notice that the dimensions reveal the factored form of the trinomial or this quadratic expression. This is the factored form of it. And if you want to explore options A, C, and D and how they might look, you can try them out with some templates that we've created. And we're going to see those in just a minute and let you play around with those. You can also play around with the 2 examples that we just looked at. We are running kind of short on time, so we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next piece. So for this next activity, we're going to use the following trinomial that you see on the screen to make a rectangle. So you are going to make a rectangle using the Google slide that we have shared. And you may also, for those who are not on Google, use some scrap paper, use some grid paper. And you can also use the chat box to share your dimensions if you'd like to do that. So I'm going to switch over here to our Google screen again, to our algebra tiles now. Okay. Just like what we did with cover the field, we're going to do the same thing. So again, if you would just hold off on doing any activity while I walk us through this, you're going to start out just like we did before. You're going to right click on slide number 1, click duplicate slide, and that'll get you a fresh screen to start with. And then go down here again, drag this note section up and type your name so that we know that this is your slide. Nobody else is to touch this. I can get that highlighted. Okay. And once you've done that, again, everybody just kind of watch for a second. What I'd like you to do is look up here, and all of these tiles you see on the side of your screen, these are available to you to use, and all you're going to do is drag them. You're just going to click on it and drag it over to the screen. Make sure that you're watching out for the dimensions, lining those things up. You will not necessarily use all of these tiles that are on the screen, so keep that in mind. Once you have picked out your dimensions and lined up, remember your goal is to make this area, x squared plus 3x plus 2. Make that on your screen, and then go down here and beside your name, type in some notes. Tell us what your dimensions are. Tell us what dimensions you discovered that made your rectangle, but you got to make the rectangle first. And then you can go in and explore other people's work. Any questions? Okay, have fun. And again, those of you who are not on Google or who are not able to manipulate these, but you can see the screen, feel free to click on somebody else's slide and see what work they're doing. Okay. I got one person up here on slide 1 that's starting to manipulate. If you could just go ahead and duplicate that slide first so that we can maintain that master slide for us, okay? Be sure you duplicate your slide first. And if you are not even able to look at the Google, you are just listening in, I will tell you what the trinomial is if you want to write it down. It is x squared plus 3x plus 2. And you might want to sketch your own tiles, how they might look if you were to manipulate these tiles around. Renee has gotten started here. She's got a good start with her squared term and some x's in there. Nice job. John has already finished up. Nice, good job. John, since you've gotten done, if you want to type in by your name, give us your dimensions, what those would be, and maybe some notes on how you got started. What was important to you in getting started? Other people, as you're going through, you can don't forget to make comments. You can give some feedback to people. Maybe you see that they need to rotate something. You can help them out. Thank you, John. I see you typing those in. Kevin and Lori working together. Excellent. Appreciate team effort. All right, so we are down to maybe 7 minutes left of this. So I know you're wanting to keep playing, but I want to take us back really quickly here because we need to see some things about this. So you have access to your those slides. They will continue to be there for you. But this is the total area that you should have made with the tiles. And I apologize, we got behind on this. You didn't get enough time to play. This is the total area that you should have found. And then these are the dimensions that would make that total area using that visual model. And this visual model helps us to see the abstract expression in its factored form. These are the factors, x plus 2 and x plus 1. And the dimensions or the factors of the rectangle are for a rectangle whose area is x squared plus 3x plus 2. And that factors into these two binomial pairs. Hopefully the time that you had, that little bit of time, you can start to see some of the important things that our students want to be doing to understand maybe where to begin to factor this, what terms are really easy to start with, what things are less easy to start with, and how to identify, particularly with those constants, how can that help you to make your dimensions? There's some big aha discoveries through that. So I encourage you when you work with students, pause at that moment, give them a chance to ask those questions and say, how did you know that you should put a 2 and a 1? Where did you make that discovery? And ask students to share that because that's an important part of this concept to introduce. So we won't have time to play with this one. So if you just kind of watch me on the screen, know that what I'm showing you, we have templates set up for you in that on those algebra tiles. So you can go back later. Even when the webinar ends, you can keep playing with this. But just watch the screen if you don't mind. So this is another problem that you might see on the high school equivalency. And the question is, what is the sum? This question I'm asking, what is the sum of the areas shown in the picture? And if you want, you've got time, you see it quick enough, you might type it into the chat box. Again, if we were working in the Google Slides, you could play around with this a bit more if you wanted. There we go. There's some answers. 3x squared. Nice. You got that because you can see the 3 blue boxes here, the big 3 squares. We have a total of 7 of these x's that are same color, so they're all together, common terms. And then we have the 2 positives at the bottom. And so the total area for this is 3x squared plus 7x plus 2. The question I'm asking now is, do you think this trinomial can be factored like we did with the other, with 2 binomials? And this is a question where I would ask the students, if you think it can, tell me why you think you can do this. But we're running close on time. So while you're thinking about, could I factor this into two binomials and how would I know? We're going to take a look at how that might look. So when I say factor, I'm really saying, can you find me the dimensions for this? And if we were playing around with it, we could explore this a bit more, but I'm going to ask you kind of think about when you see this shape, what do you know has to go up here at the very top of it? It's going to have to be something that makes that dimension. And so we know it's going to have some X value to it. And then we see that there's two, a 1 by 2 down here at the bottom with our constant. So we see, yep, excellent, X plus 2. We're already getting some feedback on the other side. And what's challenging about this, and really I should have said this before we even got started on it, is this trinomial, this area has a leading term that is greater than 1. And that can be really challenging for students. So keep in mind that that observation by the students is a really important discovery for them. And that might be something to discuss a bit more is, what does that mean in terms of the factors? What does that tell us about how we make our dimensions? What else has to be in it? So we have an X plus 2 across the top, down the side, because we have to account for that large value with the big squares. We need additional X's. So we have 3 X's down the left-hand side for 3X plus 1. And I see several of you have already put that into the chat box. Thank you for sharing those out. So now you can see the dimensions of the rectangle, and this is what we call factorization of a trinomial. And you can see the binomial pair, X plus 2 and 3X plus 1. And when you take the total area and the 4 different sections, you have a 3X squares. You have 1 little X down here, 6 X's on the side, and then 2 of these constants, and these combine to make our 7X in the middle. So can we confirm that this trinomial can be factored? The answer is yes, we can. And how do we know it's true? It made a complete rectangle. That's one thing. The area is a rectangle. And it could be factored into 2 dimensions that are the 2 binomials. And this problem, again, you can explore it some more in the Google slides that we provided you. This is template 3 in the Google slide. And 4 through 8 have some additional explorations on it. We also gave you template 9 for you to create your own. And that's some homework and takeaway for you to keep exploring a bit. I got 2 minutes left. I'm going to hit the important, where the conversation continues. So last year, we continued our pre-conference conversation with links. So there were 2 other activities that we did before we even got to the one that we all just did with this webinar. So if you want to see those activities and you want to know more about it, go to the link that you see on the screen and jump into that conversation and see what we did and actually just take a look at those other activities. And if you really want to stay involved, take a look at joining the Adult Numeracy Network. This is what we do. We come up with great resources and ideas, and I share them out. We teach each other. It's a safe space, so if you are not a math savvy person, you are especially going to feel comfortable because we believe in making math relevant to teachers' lives, and so we spend time developing our own math skills so that we can become better facilitators in our own classrooms. All of the links that we have are actually on the very last slide. I'm going to jump over quickly. The very last slide right here in the Google Doc. So you see on your screen, every link that you could possibly need from today's session is on the last slide in the algebra tiles. So feel free to go back, click on any of those, and you have everything you need. If you are going to COABE or have thought about going to COABE, come on Sunday. You get an entire day with the Adult Numeracy Network, and we're going to do much of the things like we did here today. We're going to explore this. We'll get math teachers to reveal their own math understanding so they can go back and help their own students to build from basic math to algebra. If you are going or are not able to go because you can't do all 3 days, you can actually just sign up for 1 day, and just be sure to pick that when you do the registration. Pick the Sunday as your single day. Last thing is we used this OER Commons resource to do the algebra tiles. I would encourage you to focus on the expand and factor modes in it to play around with some of the things that we talked about today. And then last but not least, Stephanie and I appreciate your time today. We have emails if you want to reach us. Feel free to do so. Are there questions I didn't get to? Because I think we're down to the minute.
I don't see any. Thank you so much, Stephanie and Heidi. You both did a wonderful job.
Thank you. Any questions that you guys come up with, feel free to shoot us an email. You can also, on those Google Slides. Keep giving feedback to your colleagues. This is how we learn and grow. So teach each other things that you might see and continue to interact with them. They're yours to share. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate your time.